I turn now to the title, 9/11, an American Empire. I will introduce this topic by quoting the endorsement by Paul Craig Roberts, who wrote, "This is the most important book of our time. Distinguished national and international scientists and scholars present massive evidence that the 9/11 Commission report is a hoax and that the 9/11 terrorist attack has been manipulated to serve a hegemonic agenda in the Middle East." You might be tempted to regard Roberts' statement that this is the most important book of our time as hyperbole. But let's think about this. If our position that 9/11 was an inside job is true, this means that the claim that America was attacked by Arab Muslims is a lie. It means that the so-called war on terror is a hoax because the 9/11 terrorists were within our own government. It means that not only the attack on Iraq, but also the attack on Afghanistan was completely devoid of justification. It means, therefore, that all the people in those two countries who have died as a result of our invasions, well over 100,000 people, have been killed on the basis of a lie. It means that the Bush-Cheney administration, which regularly describes the rulers of other countries as evil, is itself guilty of treason, mass murder of its own citizens, and mass murder of Afghanis and Iraqis. If 9/11 was an inside job, it means that all the post-9/11 restrictions on American freedoms and all the invasions of our privacy have been justified on the basis of a lie. If 9/11 was orchestrated by the Bush-Cheney administration and its Pentagon to expand the American empire, which was already the most extensive empire the world has ever known, as Ronald Steele observed already in 1967, and neocon Charles Krauthammer reaffirmed early in 2002, saying that we are the undisputed masters of the world. If 9/11 was orchestrated to expand this already huge empire, then we Americans need to ask ourselves if we wish to continue supporting this imperial project by continuing to spend more on military matters than do all the other countries of the world combined. So if our book, by demonstrating that the 9/11 movement is led by intellectuals who base their conclusions on strong evidence and sound reasoning, is able to convince Americans that 9/11 was indeed an inside job, orchestrated to increase military spending and give the administration a carte blanche to indulge its fantasy of having the first all-inclusive empire in history. If our book has the potential to do this, then what book could be called more important? But does our book have the potential to convince Americans of these truths? My own essay, which is a revised version of my lecture, 9/11 and the American Empire, which I gave in Madison in 2005, provides several types of evidence that 9/11 must have been an inside job. Part of this evidence is the fact that the military, in trying to explain why it failed to intercept the hijacked airliners, has now given us 3 different stories. When a suspect in a criminal case does this, we assume that he's lying to cover up his guilt. For example, let's say that a bank was robbed in a small town and the police suspect Charlie Smith. They come to him and say, "Charlie, where were you Saturday night?" He says, "Oh, I was at the movies." "No, Charlie, the movie theater's been closed all week." "Oh, that's right, I was with my girlfriend." "No, Charlie, we checked with her and she was home with her husband." So Charlie says, "Oh, that's right, I stayed home and read my Bible that night." They're probably not going to believe him, but we have a similar situation with the military. They first said they didn't scramble any jets until after the Pentagon was struck. That, in other words, they didn't stop the first 3 flights because they didn't try. Although that was probably the truth, it was an unacceptable truth. They quickly told a second story, which is that they did scramble jets, but they all got there too late because the FAA had been unaccountably slow in notifying the military about these hijackings. However, early members of the 9/11 Truth movement did the math, and they showed that even if the FAA had been as slow as the military claimed, the military still would have had time to intercept. It still looked like a stand down. And so, with the appearance of the 9/11 Commission report in 2004, we got a third story, according to which the FAA, after being very late in reporting the hijacking of the first airliner, did not even notify the military about the other 3 planes until after they had crashed. The military's new answer, therefore, is that they didn't intercept the planes because they were reading their Bibles. I mean because they didn't know about the hijackings. However, this new story is completely implausible for many reasons. One reason is that it contains obvious lies, a couple of which I illustrate in my chapter. A second reason is that it paints a picture of sudden FAA incompetence that day that is beyond belief. Still, another problem is that if the news story is true, then the story that the military had been telling for the 3 previous years was false. And if the military was lying then in telling a story that got them only partly off the hook, why should we believe them now when they are telling a story that gets them completely off the hook? Another reason I give for concluding that the attacks of 9/11 were an inside job is that the official account of the attack on the Pentagon is absurd. According to this account, Hani Hanjour, who could barely fly a tiny Cessna, performed a feat with a Boeing 757 that even an expert pilot probably could not have pulled off, doing an amazing 270-degree downward spiral in order to come in and hit the west wing of the Pentagon at virtually ground level, and all this without scratching the Pentagon's lawn. Another problem with this story is that if these Muslim hijackers were brilliant enough to outfox the U.S. military's defense system, they would have known that the West Wing was the worst place to strike. For one thing, it had been reinforced, so there was less damage to the Pentagon than hitting any other part of it would have caused. Even more important, the Secretary of Defense and all the top brass, whom these terrorists who hated America presumably would have wanted to kill, were all safely ensconced in the East Wing, as far away from the West Wing as possible. Why would an Al-Qaeda pilot have executed a very difficult maneuver to hit the West Wing when he could have simply crashed into the roof of the East Wing, something that perhaps even Hani Hanjour could have done? Still, another problem is the fact that, as indicated by both photographs and eyewitnesses, there were no signs that the Pentagon had been struck by a large airliner. One of the eyewitnesses was Karen Kwiatkowski. In her chapter in our book, she writes, "There was a dearth of visible debris on the relatively unmarked lawn, where I stood only moments after the impact. Beyond this strange absence of airliner debris, there was no sign of the kind of damage to the Pentagon structure one would expect from the impact of a large airliner." However, probably the strongest reason to hold that 9/11 was an inside job is the fact that the official story about the World Trade Center collapse is impossible. According to this story, the collapses were caused by the impact of the planes plus the resulting fires. One reason to conclude that this is impossible is simply the fact that fire, or fire plus damage caused by anything other than preset explosives, had never before caused the total collapse of a steel-framed high-rise building, even when the fires had been much bigger and hotter and had lasted much longer. All such collapses have been produced by explosives. So the natural assumption, the scientific assumption, would be that these 3 collapses were also caused by explosives. Moreover, there are several features of these collapses that can be explained only through the use of powerful explosives. The chapter in our book by physicist Stephen Jones describes many such features. For one thing, under all 3 buildings, there was a molten metal which remained hot for many weeks after the attacks. Now, a hydrocarbon fire, an open hydrocarbon fire, can at most get to 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. Steel does not even begin to melt until 2800 degrees Fahrenheit. Furthermore, they found a piece of steel that was partially evaporated. To evaporate steel, you need a temperature of over 5100 degrees Fahrenheit. A third factor, these buildings came straight down. Now, of course, the towers began by exploding outward, but once that was over, they came straight down. Building 7 came perfectly straight down. This means that these were symmetrical collapses. For this to occur, all the steel columns had to collapse simultaneously. In World Trade Center 7, there were 81 columns. In the Twin Towers, there were 283 columns. So the official story would have you to believe that these random fires throughout the building, which were very unequal, somehow simultaneously caused all 283 columns in each of the Twin Towers to fail simultaneously. Furthermore, these buildings came down at virtually free fall speed, which means that in the case of the towers, the upper floors, as they collapsed down on the lower floors, met no resistance whatsoever. That violates one of the basic laws of physics, the law of the conservation of momentum. Furthermore, in the towers, there were horizontal ejections, pieces of aluminum and even steel thrown out 500 feet horizontally. According to the official story, the only energy was gravitational energy. Well, that's vertical energy. What explains those horizontal ejections? Furthermore, testimony of literally dozens of people on the scene, firefighters, medical workers, journalists, and so on, saying they heard many, many powerful explosions in the buildings. The official theory cannot explain a single one of these features, but these features can all be easily explained on the theory that preset explosives were used. So in spite of what the government officials and the mainstream journalists say, only the alternative conspiracy theory can be defended on scientific grounds. It is the defenders of the official theory who are being irrational and unscientific. I will conclude by emphasizing that only part of our book is devoted to showing that 9/11 must have been an inside job. Equal attention is paid to 9/11's strategic importance for the current phase of American imperialism, which Richard Falk, John McMurtry, Peter Phillips, Ola Tunander, Morgan Reynolds, and I all characterize in terms of Falk's phrase, the global domination project. Thank you very much for your kind attention.